squatting and dead. Okay, my short answer is click the link and sign up because I take you through all of this in the membership, especially the Foundations program. But I would never gatekeep, and that's not the reason I created it. That has all the detail. Here's the skinny. Let me take a couple slides to go through this one. Anterior pelvic tilt is not inherently bad. The problem is when we stay in an anterior pelvic tilt. And what happens is the pelvis isn't going through anterior, posterior, and that ability to find a neutral position, which naturally correlates to the gait cycle. So for walking, when your leg advances forward through stance and to swing, it needs to go through both an anterior and a posterior position. And when that happens, that correlates to different muscle groups working together, and it correlates to what is happening at the pelvic floor itself as the pelvis rotates in opposite directions from one another. Outside of walking, squatting and deadlifting, if you're somebody who's really struggling with that pelvis to be able to go into those different positions, your body's going to compensate. And so if you're that person who struggles with that back pain all the time, that's your inability to lengthen through the pelvic floor usually, and then the back's going to do that instead since the pelvis isn't moving. But let's assume you're that person who's not moving well through that. And if your pelvis is spilled forward and your ribs are up, what that means is that the pelvic floor is descended, lengthened, and turned off. So like the springs on your trampoline are stretched out. And the only way to get that to ascend based on that pelvic position is to help bring those bones back through using the inner thighs and the glute medius together with your TA and your internal obliques. And it has to coordinate with your breathing diaphragm because the pelvic floor and diaphragm work together. When we breathe in, the diaphragm lowers, the pelvic floor lengthens. When we exhale, pelvic floor lifts, the diaphragm comes back up. That's one single breath. It works together like a piston. When we're in this upward flared position, a couple things are happening. Number one, the diaphragm is descended, lengthened in an inhaled state. You may struggle to take an inhale and you're going to struggle to fully exhale. We need to allow the diaphragm to ascend back up so we get the ribs to recoil down and then also help reposition at the pelvis, which means we need to focus on an exhale and we need to focus on removing the compression that you're going to have back here. So you need to get back body breathing, posterior expansion. I have an old post on this. I've got to find it. They're rounded positions where we've got the core on. We're drawing the rib cage back. We're focusing on breathing with some core tension on so that we can inhale and expand into the back body. So essentially, the point of that is if you're constantly like this, your body's going to take the path of least resistance and you're just going to continue to inflate here and not here. And if you're not breathing here, you're not breathing here, your glutes aren't going to lengthen, your posterior pelvic floor isn't going to lengthen when I deadlift, when I squat, and if that's not going to happen, your back's going to take over. The second part of why you might be having back pain related to your pelvic floor is that your core is your diaphragm, pelvic floor, TA, and your multifidi. So it's a group of muscles that works together to manage intra-abdominal pressure. And if one of those teammates isn't working well or it's just uncoordinated, it's not going to do its job to manage pressure and create stability. Therefore, your body will find that elsewhere. And so that's where a lot of those very vague things like hip pain and back pain can really be related to pelvic floor issues. The Wide Ropes PDF has one exercise that goes into detail and is one of the places I would start. It certainly does not include all of the things. So I'm going to put a list of things I've done if I were you and I'm trying to work on that area related to back pain. I would make sure that you're not bearing down or holding your breath when you're standing, and maybe you're not even paying attention to it. But I would inhale before I go, expand, exhale, zip, push through the heels to come up. So when you exhale and dip, you're activating the pelvic floor. That's going to help against downward pressure, which is going to help minimize leaks. Ibupressives are a good idea. I don't have a problem with them. They're not something I teach or really know how to do or taken the time to learn how to do. I have looked into them a lot. They are like touted as like the be all end all for prolapse. Some people will say that I've talked to of prolapse that they're the only thing that helps short term to really alleviate symptoms of heaviness. They are not the be all end all though, and there's research studies that show they have comparable outcomes to pelvic floor training. So I think they're a good idea. I don't have a problem with them. Find somebody who teaches them, and then also make sure you know how to take that concept and how to build upon it. That's like the one thing I see as like the downside is not taking you from those to like what does functional activity look like, and walking around and picking up your kids, yada yada, that sort of thing.
इसकी रिकॉर्डिंग कर रही थी, वो क्वेश्चंस के आंसर दे रही थी।